There comes a point in every silent struggle, a quiet, irrevocable shift, when what has been hidden begins to breathe on its own. It does not emerge because it was summoned, but because the weight of its suppression becomes unsustainable. That is the season you inhabit now. Others have begun to see. Not the curated version, not the carefully constructed narrative, but the reality that lived in the spaces between words, in the tension behind closed doors. They have glimpsed the quiet calculus of cruelty, the architecture of manipulation, the deliberate fractures in your spirit. And in that seeing, a fundamental game concludes. Understand, malevolence rarely seeks a spotlight. It prefers the half-light, the ambiguous remark, the seated doubt. It wraps itself in justifications and operates behind a shield of likability. It invests in confusion. It banks on your weariness, on the hope that time will blur the details into something too diffuse to name. But this strategy contains its own undoing. The world, in its quiet way, keeps accounts. The human soul recognizes patterns, and eventually the picture becomes too coherent to dismiss. What was done to you was not a series of misfortunes. It was a curriculum of choices. Small, testing choices that accumulated into something definitive. They probed for edges. How much could be taken, how much truth could be bent, how far one could venture into another's peace without repercussion. For a time, it seemed to hold. You turned the scrutiny inward as compassionate people do. You dissected your own perceptions, shouldered blame that was never yours to carry, mistook your own tenderness for naivety. Here lies the profound contradiction. Your refusal to mirror their distortion is what ultimately illuminated it. You remained upright in the storm. You did not weaponize your pain or trade your clarity for the cheap currency of revenge. You did not need to orchestrate a public unveiling. You simply continued to live in accordance with a truth you held within, a North Star they could not extinguish. That steadfastness is deeply unsettling to those whose power is woven from illusion, because a lie is a needy thing. It requires constant feeding, revision, and enforcement. Truth simply is. So others began to notice. Not because you handed them a dossier, but because the story they were being sold ceased to make sense. The math of the situation stopped adding up. Actions betrayed whispered assurances. Charm began to look like deflection, confidence like performance. Slowly, like frost receding from a window, the social fog lifted. People perceived the imbalance, who was draining and who was drained, who gained territory and who paid the price in silent currency. When this realization settles into a community, something irreversible occurs. The ground of regard shifts. Trust, once a given, becomes a question. You cannot rhetoric your way back from this exposure. You cannot charm a stain out of your moral record. Once someone is revealed as capable of treating another human being as an instrument, negotiable, disposable, that revelation becomes a permanent lens through which they are seen. This is why it is over. Not because of a dramatic showdown or a declared victory, but because the moral ledger, patient and exact, finally balanced itself. The density of truth overcame the flimsy scaffolding of lies built to contain it. Recognize this. Your endurance is not accidental. You survive because there is a core within you that resisted fermentation, even in a toxic environment. That integrity is a non-negotiable truth, more significant than any fleeting approval or hollow vindication. It is a character tempered in a hidden fire. Now, those who operated in the shadows must endure a new and unfamiliar light. They must sit with the quiet knowledge that they are seen more clearly than they ever intended. For identities built upon control and curated image, this awareness is a kind of psychological unraveling. The reflection they now encounter is not the one they crafted. You, however, are unshackled from a false narrative. The exhausting labor of trying to prove what should have been self-evident is complete. The weight has been redistributed. The burden is no longer yours to carry alone. This junction is where many falter. They believe the end of injustice signals the start of rest. It does not. It marks the beginning of a profound responsibility. You are now accountable to the forged, resilient self this ordeal created. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot feign ignorance for the sake of comfort. You cannot again betray the wisdom your pain purchased. Your path forward is one of conscious construction. You now carry a hard-won blueprint. Kindness need not be synonymous with vulnerability. Silence can be a position of power, not suppression. And sometimes the most potent closure is walking away without a backward glance, a statement that says, "I comprehend you entirely, and I withdraw my participation." Let them dwell in the aftermath of their own making. Let others arrive at their own conclusions. You are not the custodian of the fallout. Reality has assumed that role. Your task is both simpler and more demanding, to embody truth in your daily actions, to align your life so precisely with your values that deception finds no purchase, to choose connections that demand mutual honesty, not one-sided endurance, to pursue work that respects your integrity, not your submission. To choose yourself, not from a place of selfishness, but from a deep reverence for the survivor you have become. For the narrative now unfolding is not solely about their transgressions. It is about your passage through the fire without allowing it to coarsen your spirit, corrupt your ethics, or diminish your capacity for grace. That story carries a gravitational pull all its own. It is finished, not with cacophony but with crystalline clarity, and clarity, once attained, does not retrograde. When truth finally ascends, it pierces through every layer of obfuscation. For years, perhaps, those who wronged you relied on misdirection, on half-truths whispered in confidence, on the assumption that no one would ever assemble the complete picture. They gambled on your discretion, on the doubt they carefully planted, on the societal aversion to drama. But truth is an entity that operates on its own timeline. It does not require an invitation or an ideal audience. It waits only for sufficient illumination, for the contradictions to become too glaring, for the patterns to emerge from the noise. Deception, regardless of its craftsmanship, is inherently unstable. A lie is a leaky vessel. It demands constant bailing. It requires every thread of a narrative to be controlled, every potential witness managed, every incongruous behavior explained away. A single overlooked detail, one honest observer, a moment of unguarded instinct, and the entire edifice begins to strain. Truth, in contrast, is self-sustaining. It is coherent. It aligns seamlessly with facts, with the intuitive rhythms of human decency, with the unspoken laws of cause and effect. When people finally perceive what you endured and the choices that caused it, the recognition is visceral. They sense the solidity of your endurance and the profound wrongness of the burden you carried. This process of exposure is often imperceptibly subtle. It rarely involves dramatic scenes or public accusations. It happens in the quiet spaces, a furrowed brow when a story doesn't quite align, a hesitant pause that speaks volumes, a casual observation that accidentally reveals a hidden motive. It is the cumulative effect of your unwavering consistency, your refusal, day after day, to adopt their methods or validate their chaos. Over time, the pattern becomes undeniable. Truth is not loud, but it is inexhaustible, and inexhaustibility inevitably forces acknowledgement. When that acknowledgement dawns on the collective consciousness, a social tipping point is reached. The perpetrators can no longer find shelter in ambiguity. They may scramble, reframe, or attack, but the gravity of reality is inescapable. Public perception undergoes a silent, seismic shift. Credibility, once a given, begins to erode. Those who were once skeptical or deliberately blind start to sense the injustice they were complicit in ignoring. The perpetrator, stripped of their protective narrative, stands exposed. Their charm now reads as calculation, their confidence as arrogance, their excuses as admissions of guilt. Your role in this transformation is passive in action but profound in effect. By choosing not to descend into the mud, by refusing to answer manipulation with more manipulation, you created a vacuum where reality could rush in. Your life, aligned with principle, became a still pond that reflected their distortion with perfect, unsettling accuracy. When someone's existence is built upon manipulation, their story is fragile. It cannot withstand proximity to unwavering authenticity. Your refusal to engage on their terms meant their falsehoods had nothing to latch onto, no reciprocal energy to feed upon. This is the quiet, formidable power of moral coherence. It exposes corruption not through attack, but through stark, silent contrast. The psychological ramifications for those exposed are profound. To be seen, truly seen, for actions born of malice or selfishness is a form of reckoning. For those who have built an identity on being perceived as the victim, the hero, or the misunderstood genius, this is an existential crisis. They are confronted not only by the quiet judgment of others, but by the internal witness they have long suppressed, their own conscience. Guilt, shame, and a deep-seated anxiety become their constant companions. They may rage or retreat, but they cannot erase the revealed ledger. For you, this unmasking is a liberation. The immense psychic weight of carrying a hidden injustice, the need to constantly explain, justify, or doubt your own reality begins to lift. The energy once spent navigating a minefield of falsehoods is freed. You can now see with devastating clarity who builds and who destroys, who offers hand and who hides a blade. This clarity also serves as a powerful filter for your future. Authenticity attracts authenticity. Once the truth is known, it naturally draws toward you those who value integrity and repels those who traffic in toxicity. The very act of standing in your truth becomes a beacon, sorting your relationships without you having to say a word. In essence, when people finally see, it is more than a moment of justice. It is a restoration of natural order. It is the point at which deceit loses its potency, manipulation is rendered inert, and integrity becomes the undeniable standard. Their campaign against you concludes not because you defeated them, but because the false reality they tried to sustain has collapsed under its own emptiness. Truth has no agenda, it simply is, and your courage, your steadfastness provided the space for it to exist unimpeded. Never underestimate this gentle, relentless force. It does not require your fury to be effective. It does not need grand pronouncements to validate it. It asks only for your patience, your attention, and your unwavering commitment to what you know is right. The exposure of the harm done to you is the ultimate vindication. It is a testament to the principle that darkness cannot persist in the presence of sustained light. It is evidence that within the complex web of human interaction, there exists a self-correcting mechanism, moral, social, psychological, that ensures reality in time will out. You survived because you trusted this mechanism. You endured because you did not allow yourself to be corrupted into becoming a part of the chaos. And now, with the truth laid bare, you are free. Not because everyone has applauded your suffering, but because the balance has been permanently altered. The deception can no longer function. The architects of your pain are now defined by their own revealed choices. That is the supreme power of truth. It vindicates without spectacle. It clarifies without announcement. It dismantles palaces built on lies simply by persisting. By remaining rooted in your integrity, you accomplish far more than self-preservation. You establish a living framework that, by its very nature, highlights all that is false, manipulative, or corrupt around you. Integrity is not ornamental. It is structural, the steel beam of moral and psychological resilience. Those who seek to harm operate on assumptions of compliance. They anticipate fear, confusion, or a willingness to barter principles for temporary peace. When you refuse this transaction, when you hold firm to your inner compass even under duress, you elevate the entire conflict. Your consistency becomes a mirror, reflecting their duplicity back at them with a silence that is more deafening than any accusation. What does this integrity demand? First, ruthless clarity of perception, the ability to distinguish between what is right and what is merely convenient. It demands courage, for the principled path often carries a short-term cost, and it requires profound patience, for the fruits of such integrity are rarely immediate. Your adversaries may redouble their efforts, probing for a weakness, hoping to provoke you into a reaction that justifies their narrative. But each time you resist, each time you choose principle over impulse, you compound a strength that becomes undeniable. To the world, you gradually become legible as someone who cannot be manipulated, whose character does not bend to the will of others, malice. This integrity functions as a form of silent, potent resistance. The common misconception is that justice must be loud, that exposure requires a performance. Yet those who understand human dynamics know that unwavering consistency is often the most formidable opposition. By refusing to play the game by their corrupted rules, you force them to play alone, and in that solitude their tactics become absurd, visible, and ultimately self-defeating. Furthermore, integrity grants you an unparalleled inner freedom. When your life is in alignment, you are liberated from the exhausting calculus of deception. You need not remember fabricated stories, manage perceptions, or parse your words to avoid entrapment. You move with a quiet authority that springs from knowing your actions are coherent and morally sound. People are instinctively drawn to this authenticity, even if they cannot articulate why. Conversely, those who sought to harm you are repelled by it, sensing at a primal level that they cannot control or exploit a person who cannot be bent. There is a deeper, psychological sanctuary in this stance. Many believe survival requires moral compromise, that to protect oneself, one must sometimes adopt the tools of the oppressor. But this is a corruption that hollows you from within. Every time you allow cruelty or deceit to infiltrate your behavior, you create a fracture in your own spirit, a vulnerability that others can and will exploit. By holding firm, you fortify your inner citadel. You protect not only your present well-being, but also the integrity of the person you are becoming. This moral clarity also acts as a refining fire for your relationships. Those who mean you harm often cloak themselves in a guise of charm or feigned concern. But when you operate from a place of consistent integrity, these disguises begin to falter. The contrast becomes too stark. Genuine connections deepen, opportunistic ones wither. You need not launch investigations or make pronouncements. Your mere existence as an integrated person becomes a filter, naturally attracting authenticity and isolating duplicity. Consider, too, the long-term consequence for your adversaries. Your unwavering stance forces a reckoning, acknowledged or not. Every act of manipulation they commit exists in stark relief against your consistency. This contrast generates a cognitive dissonance in the social sphere, a subtle, pervasive sense that something is off. The power imbalance they relied upon begins to erode, not because of a counterattack, but because of the gravitational pull of your moral steadiness. Ultimately, integrity is the deepest form of liberation. It places the only thing you ever truly control, your own choices and conscience, front and center. When you act from principle, you shed the fear of exposure, the anxiety of misinterpretation, the weight of complicity. You walk through the world unencumbered because you have nothing to hide. This freedom of conscience is a power far greater than any temporary advantage gained through malice. Your integrity, therefore, is not merely a shield. It is a transformative force. It exposes falsehood by existing as its opposite. It repels manipulation by being incorruptible. It attracts the authentic and safeguards your future self. It transmutes every attempt to harm you into an opportunity to reveal a deeper truth about character. You need not fight them on their territory. You need only be the person who cannot be compromised. In doing so, you do not merely endure, you ascend. And in that ascent, you cast a light that defines everything it touches. Consequences are not merely possible outcomes. They are the inevitable echoes of our choices. Every action, every moral corner cut, every instance of cruelty carries a weight, a debt to reality that eventually comes due. Those who operate in the shadows often believe themselves exempt from this economy. They trust in narrative control, in silenced voices, in the fog of time. They imagine their actions can be contained, like a spill in a sealed room. But human behavior is vibrational. It sends out ripples through the interconnected web of lives and perceptions. These ripples cannot be permanently bottled. They touch shores, reflect back, and create interference patterns that become impossible to ignore. The pain they cause does not dissipate into nothingness. It transforms, often into a silent witness that gains strength with time. For a while, the architects of harm may seem to succeed. They see your restraint as weakness, your silence as consent, your introspection as self-blame. But the universe operates on principles of balance. The cognitive dissonance they create does not vanish. It accumulates like static charge. Others begin to sense the incongruity, the gap between the spoken word and the felt energy, between the persona presented and the damage left in its wake. This social friction is a form of record-keeping. The inevitability of consequence is also an internal law. When a person acts against their own moral understanding, they fracture their internal unity. That fracture, whether acknowledged or buried, persists. It manifests as a background anxiety, a defensiveness, a need to constantly reinforce their own justification. Guilt is not always a conscious feeling. Sometimes it is a subconscious tax on peace, a parasite on contentment. This is the psychological reckoning, a private, inescapable consequence that no public image can erase. Social consequences follow a similar law of gravity. Relationships built on exploitation are inherently unstable. Trust, once revealed as a tool, cannot be easily restored. The community, however, slowly begins to recalibrate. Allies reassess. Observers connect dots. The influence that was wielded through fear or charm begins to dilute because its foundation, authentic regard, was never there. This erosion is not a punishment imposed from outside. It is the natural collapse of a structure built on sand. It is crucial to grasp that consequences are not about cosmic vengeance, but about realignment. Evil by its nature is a destabilizing force. The perpetrator in harming another often destabilizes themselves. Their identity becomes entangled with the very deceptions they employ. When truth emerges, that identity faces a crisis. The behaviors they use to control others become the evidence of their own undoing. They are caught in the trap of their own design. This inevitability is a powerful teacher. It imparts the lesson of moral gravity. Every choice has mass and trajectory. Those who believed they could act with impunity eventually learn that the world is not a void. It is an echo chamber. The long-term cost, in lost respect, fractured relationships, and inner turmoil, almost always exceeds the fleeting gain they sought. For you, understanding this provides a profound form of empowerment and patience. It means you do not have to become the arbiter of justice. You do not need to orchestrate downfall or seek retribution. By simply maintaining your integrity, you allow the natural laws of consequence to operate. You become a catalyst not through action, but through being a fixed point of reality against which falsehood must, eventually, collide and shatter. Your steadfastness accelerates the natural timeline of accountability. Consequences are multifaceted. They may arrive as social isolation, as missed opportunities born of lost credibility, as the quiet horror of facing one's own reflection. These are not random misfortunes. They are the organic results of specific choices. The universe in this sense is a perfect mirror. What one casts out returns, shaped by the nature of the original throw. This understanding allows you to navigate with a liberated perspective. Justice does not always wear the cloak of immediacy. It unfolds in its own season when the conditions are ripe and the pattern is undeniable. Your endurance is never in vain. The wrongs committed against you will meet their answer in the unyielding arithmetic of cause and effect. You need not force the reckoning. The system is already rigged in favor of eventual balance. Therefore, consequences are the natural, restorative counterpart to action. They are the universe's method of correcting moral imbalance, of reaffirming that no lie is forever and no cruelty is without cost. By comprehending this principle, you find a deep-seated strength. You see that your survival and your integrity are not just personal triumphs. They are active participations in a restorative order that ensures no one operates in true defiance of reality forever. In the end, the weight of their choices belongs entirely to them. Your hands are free. To survive harm without allowing it to transmute your spirit into something bitter, resentful, or equally compromised is an act of fierce, active creation. It is not passive endurance. It is the daily, deliberate choice to protect the sanctity of your inner world while the outer world storms. Each act of malice directed at you is, in a twisted sense, a test of your existential craftsmanship. Will you let their choices dictate the material of your soul? This kind of survival is transformative because it demands more than resistance. It demands a deep philosophical engagement with your own core. When others try to diminish you, you are forced to define what is undiminishable. You must locate that which is worth defending at any cost. This process is a brutal but precise refinery. It burns away the superfluous, the people-pleasing, the outdated loyalties, the fear of conflict, and leaves behind a purified sense of self. You learn with terrible clarity not only who they are, but more importantly, who you are when everything else is stripped away. In this way, you are not merely reacting to an external attack. You are engaged in the most profound act of self-authoring. You are deciding, moment by moment, the character of the person who will emerge from the crucible. This forgives a strength that is not brittle but flexible, not the hardness of stone, but the resilience of tempered steel. It is a strength that understands its own composition. This forged self carries a new kind of wisdom. You can now discern the early tremors of manipulation, the subtle language of disrespect, the architecture of a toxic dynamic before the walls are fully built. Your perception becomes your greatest protection. You learn that boundaries are not walls of hostility, but expressions of self-respect, and that upholding them is a language the wrong kind of people will never understand, but the right kind will always respect. The transformation also grants a profound empathy, forged in the fire of your own suffering. This is not a blanket forgiveness or a weakness, but a deep understanding of pain that allows you to connect with genuine kindness while simultaneously being impervious to its counterfeit versions. You can spot real hurt because you have known it, and you can recognize performative victimhood because you have seen its opposite. Perhaps the most significant change is the relocation of your center of gravity. Your worth, your validation, your sense of peace are no longer held hostage by external opinion or the behavior of others. They are internally generated and governed. You become the unwavering source of your own legitimacy. This is the ultimate liberation, to look at the faces of those who once held such power to disturb your world and feel not anger, but a quiet, unshakable pity, for they are still chained to the need to control, while you have graduated to the power of being whole. This is the legacy of surviving with integrity. You become a living testament to a profound alchemy, that the deepest wounds, when tended with courage and conscience, can become the very sites of your greatest strength. You do not just carry on. You carry forward, illuminated from within, a beacon not of a pain that happened, but of a humanity that remained intact, and in remaining became unbreakable. The story ends where it began, within you. But the person who closes the book is not the same person who opened it. You have read the text of cruelty and chosen to write a different story entirely, in the indelible ink of your own unwavering spirit.